Hello and welcome. This is another one of our series of interviews with different professionals throughout the country. And these interviews are for my UCLA Special Issues and College Counseling class. Today I have with me Layne Rodrigues, who hails from Visalia, California. Welcome, Layne.
Hi, thank you for
And
having me.
Layne is a dancer, and she did a lot of performing arts throughout high school and college. So, Layne, thanks for coming and talking about your background and experience. And so let's start off with that. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your high school experience, what that was like.
Yes, of course. Well, I grew up in a very small town. I grew up as a competitive dancer. So, with being in a small town, I had to travel in order to expand in my performance arts. So, I'd have to travel to LA, San Francisco. So, it took me kind of all over California and sometimes traveling across the nation as well. So, I found that after leaving middle school and trying to go into a high school, I wanted something a little more flexible. So we chose a private school in town, and I went there for my freshman and sophomore year. Unfortunately, I found out later that we had some accreditation problems. So that was kind of the first loophole that I was presented. We went in assuming that I would be given the same work and set up for a competitive level to get into a UC or a state school or any of the universities that I was hoping to apply to eventually. And unfortunately, sophomore year, I realized that was not the case and that I would obviously need to go to 2 years of community college, which was not what I wanted to do, especially with my performance background and where I wanted to go with that. So that was my high school experience. It was a little alternative. So my sophomore year going to junior year, I decided to go into homeschooling or a version of that. Well, I had to get creative because there wasn't a whole lot of options out in the Central Valley where we were from, and especially at that time. So I ended up choosing an online program to go through, which weren't as readily available and accessible as they are now. This was kind of up and coming at the time. So it was very new still. So I took some of my courses through the online program, and then I also took a couple of classes at the community college nearby, which I had to go be present in those classes. So my science lab class I had to take at the community college to get those credits. But actually it ended up being a blessing being able to take the classes at the community college, because all of a sudden went from being surrounded in a high school experience where you have some people like myself, and then you have some people on the other spectrum who just are there to get through. And in some ways I felt like going to community college was helpful because people were paying to be there. They wanted to be there. They intentionally chose to be there. So it was a very different atmosphere for me coming from high school to that at such a young age. So both my junior and senior year was mixed of online courses and then going back and forth to community college, which left me a lot of flexibility to travel with my dancing. So it was a very alternative path and not what I had planned for myself, but what ended up happening to kind of remedy a situation that I was put in from the private school.
Very good. And yeah, having that alternative background, that puts you in a unique place when it did come to looking for what you want to do in
Very,
higher education. So when did you decide that you
yeah.
wanted to pursue dance as at the college level, Layne?
I knew in high school, at least in my sophomore, junior year, that I wanted to pursue dance as a major or some sort of performing arts. Um, Actually, when I came to see you is when I realized how plausible that was as an option, because you're told so often that that's not a real major, or that's not performing arts is not, competitive enough, or it's not a real major. And there's a lot of backlash on that because I was a good student and I was bright. So for me to go from, being a bright, successful high school student saying I would like to go into performing arts seemed confusing to some people, and I got a lot of backlash for that. But I knew in high school that I wanted to. So for me, it was just a matter of finding the right school and the right opportunity and to figure out how I could get into those schools. That was the biggest challenge that I think we both went through. A lot of loopholes, a lot of figuring out to do that, which I think in turn helped me later on in my life, being able to be flexible, adaptable, think outside the box, because I wasn't just given the bullet points or the outline of this is how you get into college, follow this formula and you will succeed. I knew I wanted to succeed, but it had to be very alternative because of situations that were really out of my control and then also where I wanted to go. So we had to get very creative, which at the time was really hard, but I think now looking back made me better for it.
And you bring up a really good point, because when you're going through it, it can seem very stressful and just almost overwhelming. And then once you learn something about yourself and you get through that, and then you look back and say, oh, I grew, this helped me develop skills that I had never used before at a very formative time in your life too. So what was the
I
audition
think a
process?
lot of students,
Go ahead.
the audition process, the audition process was very interesting. And this was partly because of the schools I was choosing to apply to. I chose from private schools to UC's, University of California, and state schools. So all three are very different types of auditions, very different programs. There was a couple that a lot of the UCs were kind of similar, as in their applications would be similar. Their audition process was similar. State schools tended to be like each other, and then the private schools were more similar to each other. So that was helpful once I understood how they were run. But it was very challenging, and I think for me, having something that worked for me in the audition process, because all of them were so different, I couldn't plan for each of them the same, was having set choreography and plan stuff that I could rework for different auditions. So just as if you had to write different essays with the same concept, you might rework some of your same writing to fit different essays. That's kind of what I did with choreography. And I think that could work really in any performance arts, to have some core presentation that you have ready to go, that you know that you can rework for different auditions, because that was a requirement almost at all of them, was to perform a solo at each of the schools. And then the other part was being with the whole group, and then they would audition you like a company almost. So it was, having my competitive background was really helpful because it set me up for understanding how the audition process works and being prepared to learn on the spot and being able to be adaptable to that situation. But each of them were really different. So having something ready that you could rework music-wise and choreography-wise was helpful for me. So I didn't have to recreate something each time.
Absolutely. And that's good words of advice. So what were you looking for when you were looking at all these different dance programs? What were you looking for in your dance program? And then how did you narrow down your choice?
Well, I think for me in the dance community and world, I was looking for a certain type of program that would help me making network connections with professors, because I wanted to do something with my dance after college. I wanted to be in Southern California in the LA, Los Angeles dance world. That is very different if you're going to choose a school in New York. That's very different or if you're going to choose a school in San Francisco. There's a different emphasis on the program. I was looking for something that was a little more commercial, had jazz infused in it. A lot of programs, they're either ballet-based or modern-based or theater-based. So for me, when I found Loyola Marymount, and Chapman University was very similar too, being right there in the hub of the dance community where in Los Angeles, I found that there was a lot of networking that intrigued me. There was a lot of professors that worked professionally in that world. And so for me, that was a big draw to LMU. was the jazz part of it, and that it was a little bit more commercial. Like, how are you going to turn this into a career for performance? Now, if I wanted to do company work, I might have chose, or modern dance, I would have chose a different school. That might not have been the best school for me. I wanted something a little more commercial based, jazz, performing, television, commercial, that kind of realm. So that's what drew me to that school, because I knew it would help develop me in that way. But I think if you're looking for, everyone has a certain niche that they want to go into, whether it's music or dance or whatever it may be. So finding what that university or program's specialty is really going to help you. Because I've had a friend before who she's really wanted to just do company work, modern dance. So she found a great school up north that could transfer her into that program in such tight communities that you need to find dance programs that the teachers and professors are involved in outside work, because that's going to help you transition into the real world.
Good. That makes a lot of sense. And I know you were looking for particular instructors and particular people to connect with. And so that had a big influence. And that's where knowing and understanding what the different programs offer, it's not just a dance. Not all dance programs are created equal, just like not all STEM program, whatever. So that's an important thing to understand. So where did it take you? What did you end up doing? You want to describe some of the things you did then while you were at LMU?
I ended up actually within my first 2 months of being at LMU, our jazz instructor, they ran the audition to level us in our classes. Well, little did I know that network connection. He was also the assistant choreographer for Rihanna at the time under Tina Landon. And so he was assisting the VMA, the Video Music Awards for MTV for Rihanna, which is very much commercial. And it was kind of a whirlwind, but he asked a couple of the students at LMU that he noticed to be a part of it. So within the first 2 months of me being at LMU, I got to go on MTV Video Music Awards and be a backup dancer for Rihanna, which is kind of crazy to think that all happened so quickly. But it just shows you, too, who you know and can run into and who you can show your work to. If he would have never known that I was, you know, the type of dancer that I was, if I didn't get the opportunity to dance in front of him. And at the time, my agency, I wasn't high enough in my agency to get a call. I would have never been invited to that audition. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes they don't even they just pull from people they know. They needed a couple extra people. He's like, I have a couple dancers that I really like, you know, that I see, and they're great workers. And so I think they'll be good to go. So he just chose us right from our audition at school. So that was one of the first experiences I had. The other was I got to do many performances at school, and then that led me to some performances throughout LA and theater performances. The other two big ones were dancing on Glee. I got to do 2 episodes in that. And that was really helpful too, because my program was understanding that I did have to miss. I was at a private school where your absences are counted. So you don't just get to show up when you want to and take notes from your friend. And especially in the dance program, it was very strict. You could only miss 2 times in a semester system, which is not a lot. And so that was really helpful to have a program. When I told them why I was going to be gone that day, they were understanding. Now, not all programs are going to be understanding. If they look down upon commercial dance work because they're more focused on company work, there's kind of a ridge between the two. They may not think that that's a plausible excuse to miss the day of school. I had teachers that were really understanding, and so I could use one of my absences for that and not have it count against me. So it was hard to do all while in school, but I found that it was really helpful that I chose that particular program because the community of professors and students were all like-minded for the most part. The other thing that was really helpful that it was a private school and small, that I really got to work with the head of our dance department one-on-one instead of just working, with a communications counselor. I got to, meet with the head of the department several times. And again, like my alternative path in high school, I kind of took an alternative path in college as well. I decided that I did just want to stick with a dance major. I felt like that was enough for me. That's what I always wanted to do, despite some people saying, hey, you should add in a second major, or maybe you should minor in something and have an alternative. I felt like I knew whatever I was going to do, what I was learning at LMU through the dance program, I would be able to take with me elsewhere. And so I decided that I wanted to get out into the real world sooner than later. So she helped me, which is kind of unheard of now when you hear how hard it is to get into classes that you need. I was able to graduate in 3 years.
Yeah.
Without going to community college before. So I really went in with no extra credits and was able to get enough credits per semester. And it took, yes, hard work on my part, but it took the program and the people in it helping me to do that, making sure I could get into the classes I needed, making sure that I was set up and they would double check with me that I approved. I would have to go get my extra credits approved that I was taking on these extra units, because they cap you at 18 and I was taking 22 units a semester. So it was a lot of work, but I had a lot of people holding me up too. So it wasn't just me. So I think that's important too when seeking counseling or help, that, you go through the student through the roadblocks, because there was different things that would come up and we'd have to get creative, just like I did with you in high school. Well, how are we going to move through this, And so that's kind of the same thing I did in college, and it really worked. It was helpful for me in my path.
So talk about where that took you and what you're doing now.
Well, so after I graduated, I lived in Los Angeles for a couple of years and danced professionally. So all those connections that I made in college helped me there. Also, part of my senior thesis in my senior year, I was able to do a certification and document my progress through that was unique as well, because most people were choreographing pieces for the show, and I decided I wanted to get certified in Pilates. I had sustained a couple injuries in high school, which also made getting into college even more difficult, because it was right before the audition when I tore my ankle apart and really was in recovery when I was going through the audition process. Through that, I never really fully healed from that injury because I pushed through it so much in that whole auditioning time. So when I went into my freshman year of college, I had a lot of pain, and my ankle was pretty messed up in many ways, lost a lot of flexibility, lost a lot of strength, and it was affecting my day-to-day life. Part of the program, the dance program, we had access to, just like the sports athletes, we had access to physical therapy and a Pilates studio. So that I kind of found this little home away from the dance department that I really fell in love with, that I had no idea. We had to take kinesiology as part of our program, and I got to be really close with our physical therapist, and so I would work with her, and she'd work on my ankle and my hip and some other injuries that were going on, and I got to know the Pilates instructor really well. Well, I started taking Pilates. I had never taken on equipment before. That had never been accessible to me in the area that I grew up in, such a small town. I had never heard of equipment Pilates. I'd never even seen it. So for me, that was a whole new world that was opened up to me, that was a lot more kind and a lot more helpful than the dance world that I was in. So while I had fun for a couple years after college dancing, I was teaching Pilates on the side at a couple different private studios and gyms in LA. And I found I would keep wanting to go. I would look forward to that more than the other work. So I decided it would have been 2013 that I wanted to open a Pilates studio. Well, it was a matter of where and when and how. So I kind of went with the attitude that I had in college and in high school of, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I will figure out as it comes. That you don't always have to have a formula or an outline to follow, that you can kind of create your own, which I think was confusing for a lot of people. I remember my grandpa was like, where's your business plan? I need to see it written out. And I was like, it's in my head, like I have it. So I think for me, it was really, and not that I wasn't prepared, but I obviously did my research and figured things out. I decided I wanted to move back closer to home. So I moved back to about 30 minutes of where I was from, to a smaller town where there wasn't really anything like I wanted to open. So I thought this could be a really good market for what I wanted, or it could go really south. People could not be receptive to it as well. So I decided to open my own Pilates and bar studio, which for me, growing up, my mom had a dance studio. So I watched her in that realm. So it wasn't completely foreign to me to run your own business. I had soaked in a lot of that information growing up. But for me, this was going to be more helping people. I was going to help people like I was helped in college, that you can move through life and feel good. You don't have to live with all of these aches and pains and chronic injury. You can still have them, but find ways to adapt and feel better. So for me, that's what I focused on when I opened the studio. And then the business side of things just started to unfold as I just checked one thing off the list, kind of like I did in college and high school. So all of that kind of circling back around how it had to be adaptable, flexible, really think outside the box, brought me into what I do now and helped me create a successful business here. And I've been open. I was telling you before the chat that we just celebrated our 2-year anniversary this last October. So we're going on almost 2.5 years now here and growing. Now I have another instructor who's a physical therapist working with me at the studio. So we're growing slowly, but it's definitely working out well. And I can bring my dance experience and all the knowledge I have from that to help men and women. I do have some men that take, and help them learn about their bodies and just how to move better. So it was really alternative, but it brought me into a place that I'm really happy and felt like this is where I should be in life.
That's so fabulous. And it's so great that you've taken all of this and melded this all together into your own path and for the future. So in closing, we just have a few more minutes, but, looking at that and looking at your journey, you had people tell you, oh, why are you studying dance? It's not not a real major or things like that. What would you tell us as counselors? What advice do you have for us to give to students who are thinking about a performing arts major such as dance?
Have an idea of where you do want to take it. Some people will say it's not a real major. It's not if you don't have an intention of where you want to go with it. That's just like going into any major. It's ignorant to think, I'm just going to get this major and do something with it. Many people spend years, as an engineer major and don't do anything with it, do completely opposite. They become real estate agents. So in like any major, I think that you have to have an intention for what you want to use it for, and then get realistic about that. How am I going to use this to help me? Then look at the program you're looking for. Look at what their emphasis is, what their professors are like, that networking relationship can take you into. Does that lead you into the direction that you want to go? Or is it leading you into a completely different direction? So having that awareness, and then also to not be ignorant about the business side. It's not a terrible thing to think about a minor in business, or some people double major. It's okay, I think, to know that you're well-rounded. Yes, you have this creative side, but it's not a bad idea to understand the business side of the arts as well, because at the end of the day, whether you want to do your own company. You have to learn to write grants. You have to learn to fund your company or work for one. So it's good to not to be well-rounded and understand the other parts of it, that yes, we are creative people and that we perform and we have this ability to express, but you also need to have the business side of it too. So wherever you want to pull that from, maybe it's taking different classes, talking to your counselor. Well, I really need to understand more how this works. So what would you suggest for me in taking, maybe this is my elective, instead of taking surfing as your elective, maybe you want to take something that's going to benefit your career or what you want to do with your art.
I think that's very sage advice, is to have that realistic perspective and use that as a vehicle to see where you want to go and what you want to do. So, well, and if people want to get a hold of you, how do they reach you, Layne?
They can reach me by email, Layne, Layne, at flow, FLOW, studios.net.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much, Layne. Thanks for taking your time out in between classes. And it's so great to catch up with you. And I know my students will really appreciate hearing, because it's so important to hear from somebody who's just gone through this. And hopefully they'll share this with some of their students as well. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Bye, Cindy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.